This telephoto camera is the most insane I've used in any smartphone. So this is the Oppo Find X8 Pro, and it could be the phone that's about to give Apple and Samsung a much needed kick in the pants. There are a few reasons why this phone matters. First, one of the best camera setups of 2024, with dual periscopes and an excellent portrait mode in particular. Next, Oppo's ColorOS is actually good now, with a level of smoothness and attention to detail that's a major step up from previous versions. And it's the first global flagship launch for Oppo in a couple of years. The Find X6 and X7 series didn't arrive outside of China due to legal disputes with Nokia at the time. Now you can buy the Find X8 in Europe and other parts of Asia, but sadly not America. But even if you're in the US, you'll want to stick around and see what this phone can do, because it is a great example of what could be in the US market if only it was a bit more competitive. So I'm going to focus mainly on the camera in this review, because that I think is the most interesting thing about this phone by far. But first, let's set the scene and dig into what you're actually getting with this hardware here. This is a precisely crafted design in a 6.78-inch display size that does away with the sweeping curves of older Oppo and OnePlus flagships, but still feels rounded and comfortable to use. The display technically is flat, with uniform bezels on all four sides, but the glass gently bubbles up here to avoid the hard edge that you get with the Pixels and iPhones of the world. 4500 nits of peak brightness here, so this looks fantastic even in bright daylight. There's an additional low contrast mode that you can activate as part of the dark theme when in very low light, which is nice to see, and it comes with all your usual eye comfort options, including an ultra low flicker mode. Around back, the pearl white model I'm using has a pretty unique matte glass finish with a sort of marble tiled effect complemented by a sandstone-like reflective grain. It's more eye-catching than the plain old black colorway that is also available, but I'm not a huge fan of the reflective pattern here. It kind of gives me bathroom tile vibes. And with the design of this big old camera hump, I actually prefer it to the way OnePlus and Honor do this style of circular camera module, more symmetrical with the finely machined trim here. But let's be honest here, it does also kinda look like it belongs on a stovetop. Not my favorite aesthetic then, but it's fine, I don't hate it. A sort of low-key reason this phone is a big deal is because it represents an important design win for chipmaker MediaTek. The Find X8 Pro runs the new Dimensity 9400 SoC, the latest and greatest from the Taiwanese vendor. It benchmarks just shy of Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Elite if you care about that kind of stuff, while rivaling Apple's A18 Pro in multi-core performance. Like all the leading-edge chips, it's built on TSMC's 2nd Gen 3nm process, so it's ludicrously efficient as well. And in my experience, it runs pretty cool too, as in, at one point I recorded around 20 minutes of 4K video footage indoors, and this thing wasn't even warm to the touch. In the UK at least, there's only one SKU being sold with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 storage, more than enough of both in my opinion, and a stark contrast with 128 gigs still being offered by many of the larger players. A ginormous battery too, 5910 mAh. That higher capacity is thanks to Oppo's move towards silicon carbon technology for its cells, allowing for higher energy density. Pretty much a worst case scenario for me was 6 hours of screen on time over a single day of very heavy use, which is still an excellent level of performance from any smartphone. And by heavy use, I mean out all day on 5G while taking lots of photos. With lighter use, this is definitely a multi-day per charge phone. With more moderate use indoors, you can easily stretch that out to 8 or so hours of screen on time. Quick battery refills are taken care of thanks to Oppo's Super VOOC charging standard up to 80 watts. My unit came with a plug in the box, though Oppo says this may vary from country to country. And you get fast wireless charging too, up to 50 watts via a compatible Oppo or OnePlus wireless charger, or alternatively slower trickle charging via any cheap pad. So, as is the case with many a flagship phone, battery life and charging speeds are at the level where you don't really need to worry about either of them. And graphically speaking, this phone delivers performance that's not quite at Snap 8 Elite level, but still very respectable, and in fact beating the iPhone 16 Pro Max in Geekbench's solar-based stress test. In the optional high-performance mode, it managed a higher peak than the ROG Phone 9 Pro, but with heavier throttling over time, leading to a lower lowest loop score and also less stability overall. The ROG phone obviously though is a gaming-focused phone, so I think the Find held its own really well in this benchmark. So Oppo's ColorOS has for the past couple of release cycles seemed to me to just be a slightly more polished version of what OnePlus has been shipping in the West. ColorOS 15 though is a major revision, and a lot of the underlying look and feel of the old ColorOS, or what you might know as OxygenOS, has changed. That mainly has to do with the animations and a lot of attention to detail. If you're the kind of person whose daily use case involves furiously swiping in and out of a bajillion different apps at once, and possibly also operating a popular cat-themed phone-leaking social media account, then Oppo's got you covered through its new luminous rendering engine, which can indeed allow you to swipe around like a madman. But more than that, the way UI elements like the quick settings area here flow into place has been given noticeable touch-ups, as have the animations for app loads and multitasking, and even locking and unlocking this phone with seamless animations to take you from the ambient display to the home screen. All these individual small touches really add up to a feeling of a more polished smartphone UI than I've had from any OnePlus or Oppo device in the past. Oppo also says it's doubled down on performance with a new CPU Vitalization Performance Booster feature, though it's difficult to tell exactly what all these features are doing, even though, admittedly, in terms of day-to-day performance, this phone always flies. And some of these are just comical though, like here I'm not sure how defragmenting 3 megabytes of data is a good idea at all on a device with solid-state storage. Leave a note in the comments if you've actually defragmented anything since the days of Windows XP. But this being 2024 though, a boatload of new AI features is inevitable in any new phone software, and Oppo includes the obligatory meeting transcription and document summarizing options that you would expect. But my favorite AI features are obviously the ones that tie into photography, and there are a few here which really do match Samsung and Google move for move. In particular, the reflection remover you'll find is a lifesaver if you've ever tried to shoot scenery through thick glass or an airplane window. Meanwhile, the AI Unblur and AI Clarity Enhancer can pull surprisingly usable shots out of blurry or grainy originals, though that AI upscaler can definitely be a bit aggressive with pulling out lines and also smushing away some of those fine details. There are some minor irritations with this software though, like the way the weather app likes to bump you to the stock Oppo browser to view pretty much anything outside of basic forecasts, and the insistence to surface pollen counts in Northern Europe in the middle of winter. And the Oppo App Market app just loves to tell me about junk files waiting to be cleared, when actually that's just app caches doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But make no mistake, this is still a very polished overall experience from Oppo, and I don't know, I kinda like it. So the cameras are the main reason why you might be thinking about buying this phone, and there's some serious hardware lurking around the back of the Find X8 Pro, in the form of a quadruple 50 megapixel setup. The primary is a Sony LYT808, a 1/1.4-inch sensor behind an f1.6 lens with OIS. That's not the largest sensor out there, and certainly not the 1-inch monster sensor of Oppo's previous Ultra phones, but the wide aperture does a lot to compensate for its slightly reduced size, and it's still possible to take shots with a pleasing amount of natural bokeh from this primary camera, even if you're not pressed up right against your subject. The 50 megapixel res also gives you plenty of wiggle room to punch in at 2x and still capture a photo that'll have ample fine details and a nice bit of visible background separation. The ultra-wide is a 1/2.75-inch Samsung JN5 with autofocus behind an f2 lens, which is decent though not quite the best in class. Google's Pixel 9 Pro has a larger sensor and a brighter lens, not to mention a wider field of view as well, though Oppo's does compare favorably to the iPhones. And in moderately lit indoor scenes, Oppo's processing did a good job of avoiding the noise and grain around the edges of the frame that you see with a lot of other ultrawides, though arguably at the cost of slightly softer looking photos overall. My favorite of the quartet is the 3x telephoto, a 1/1.95-inch Sony IMX882 that obliterates the S24's ancient and tiny 3x shooter. That's behind an f/2.6 lens with OIS. And of the 1,000+ photos I've taken with this phone, the 3x has shot many of my favorites. The larger sensor and brighter lens combined with Oppo's intelligent processing means that even in shots like this of a moving horse in relatively dim lighting, still produces a crisp and clear shot. And there are many other creative possibilities too with a lens of this kind that gives you this level of bokeh for a really nicely separated background. Meanwhile, the starburst-shaped bokeh, while it may just be a side effect of the lens's construction, definitely gives shots from the 3x a unique look, all the while coming surprisingly close to the performance of the primary shooter in low-light situations. And our quad camera setup is rounded off by the smallest of the four, a 6x 50 megapixel periscope super telephoto using Sony's IMX858, a 1/2.51 incher behind an f4.3 lens, also with OIS. While slightly smaller than the 3x and thus slightly weaker in lower light, the extra versatility this zoom range gets you is what turns a good camera experience into a really great one. Just look at the level of bokeh that you get in shots like this, focusing on relatively near objects. Meanwhile, this is of course your main tool for pulling out details from distant scenery, a task it mostly excels at, in part thanks to Oppo's intelligent processing that kind of brings some AI-enhanced inference into play. That is to say, it does some AI guesswork and number crunching in producing detailed photos at longer zoom ranges where perhaps there isn't enough raw optical data to do a decent job otherwise. Most of the time in landscapes and even shots of people, that's not a problem, but you can see some edge cases here where the AI gets tripped up, especially in some cases with text here where there's not enough information for it to work with and it kind of just trips over and produces a garbled mess. And that's a minor gripe with what is an otherwise excellent super telephoto experience, and one that, although it works pretty differently to what Samsung and Google is doing, gives both a run for their money and arguably beats them in a lot of longer distance shots. Portrait mode was another favorite for me, whether I'm using the primary at 1x or 2x or the 3x lens for a tighter shot. Once again, Oppo's processing manages to subtly touch up the lighting a little here and enhance the bokeh effect while navigating its way around tricky obstacles like hair and soft clothing. Even in relatively darker conditions, again and again I was pleasantly surprised. Around front, the 32 megapixel selfie camera doesn't offer as wide a field of view as some others like Google's Pixel, but nevertheless proves a versatile performer in a variety of lighting conditions, even in darker situations and with lots of backlighting. Video performance also impressed me across the board, though with one or two caveats. This is one area where the absence of a larger image sensor can be seen in places, mainly in darker conditions. In moving shots, that is, where you're moving with the camera as opposed to just panning side to side, you will notice some juddering around brighter areas of the image. That'd be much less visible with a 1-inch sensor like Oppo's Ultra, or with Google's Night Sight Video feature, which offloads processing to the cloud for enhanced night videography. Oppo also has its own ultra steady mode, which works at 4K with 30 FPS, and that does a decent job of smoothing out even challenging moving shots, though with the cost of a tighter crop within your scene. There is a predictable reduction in quality when shooting with the ultra-wide, especially in darker conditions. I wouldn't say this ultra-wide is a poor performer per se, just kind of run-of-the-mill. And you can get surprisingly good looking footage out of both the 3x and 6x cameras even in challenging lighting environments, though a steady hand is recommended, and you'll definitely want to limit any motion to predictable pans as opposed to wild flailing movements. You might have also noticed this little virtual shutter button on the right edge here, similar to the iPhone's camera control key, and it's fine. Like the iPhone, you can use it to zoom in and out, however, as with the iPhone, doing so isn't necessarily any easier than just touching the screen. But the squeeze gesture is a little more predictable when you're picking it up versus the iPhone. Either way, I found this extra virtual button to be pretty underwhelming, only occasionally using it as a shortcut to jump into the camera app. So yeah, moving on. The Oppo Find X8 Pro is one of the most enjoyable phones I've used in 2024, and at its UK price, which almost matches Samsung's S24 Plus, you're getting a lot more phone for your money. That's mostly due to the really versatile camera setup that brings an excellent standard of performance to all four of its rear shooters. In particular, the 3x and 6x telephotos show the direction the likes of Samsung should be moving in, with twin large sensors able to balance the need for longer zooms and dependable low-light performance. Oppo's software is better than ever as well, with a newfound focus on smoothness and attention to visual detail that's sometimes been lacking in the past. And it's a big win for MediaTek, with a chip that delivers impressive performance while sipping battery power. But of course, American consumers can't buy this phone, and that is a shame. By global standards, the US phone market remains grotesquely stagnant, with only Samsung and Apple, and I guess more recently Google, being the main handset options. The Find X8 Pro then is a great example of the spice of variety available in other parts of the world. Let me know what you think of the Oppo Find X8 Pro down in the comments, and in particular those quad camera capabilities. Stick around for more reviews and comparisons coming very soon, but in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.